That was the question that animated our application to NEH a couple of years ago to host these two Summers Institutes on this topic. So we recognize that the culture of the Academy is changing, but it's changing in ways that are sort of unpredictable in terms of promotion and tenure and evaluating digital scholarship. There's a lot of people out there who, particularly administrators, who find themselves in a position of having to oversee, mentor, and ultimately evaluate colleagues that are coming up and increasingly working in digital environments. And so we figured having a kind of national conversation about this among administrators and digital practitioners might serve to push things forward. I think what we found was that there is a wave of interest in this. There was a lot of administrators and department chairs who came because this was happening. These were real problems they were facing in the department. It wasn't sort of a theoretical, like maybe someday we'll think about digital scholarship, or they were digital, sort of advanced guards, something like that. No, they were just sort of rank and file from everyone from Princeton down to American University of Beirut, but then small colleges and things here. They were like, I have people in my department right now we've hired who are working in some digital space, and I need to talk about it and really know what to do with them. I don't think we gave them any answers, but it was really a question of how do we begin to talk about this, and what are the questions, what are the values, what are the procedures and best practices. In some ways, what are the preconditions for a healthy culture of evaluation that you might institute at the departmental level, or at the college level, or up and down the chain, so that these kinds of decisions and evaluations can be made.
Yeah, I'll just say that for a while I was on the Committee for Information Technology of the Modern Language Association, and they had come up with guidelines for departments about how to evaluate digital scholarship that were dated, and they've recently been revised after I cycled off the committee. But there's also a lot of articles about this very issue in the journal Profession, in the ADE Bulletin, and those kinds of things. I think on the ground, though, even though people are recognizing this and taking up some of those guidelines, my sense is on the ground it's still very difficult. A lot of the people that we saw at the NEH Summer Institute were in fact trying to do digital cluster hires in the humanities, in history or English mostly, and they are doing them now. But I know, in fact, of a major digital humanities center that hired an historian who did digital work and didn't get tenure, because you still have to be tenured through a traditional department. And if your department won't play with the rules that you suggest, they just won't, And so it's a very difficult moment, I think.
Yeah, building on that, I think it's essential that we all agitate and advocate strongly in our own departments to make sure that our departmental standards, if the departments have autonomy in any kind of way, reflect that kind of scholarship. So 3 years ago, our chair decided we need to revise our entire standards document on everything. And because I was the chair of the research committee, my committee got the task of revising our whole research standards document. And one of the clear messages from the chair and sympathetically from a lot of colleagues was that we needed to articulate very specifically where digital scholarship fit into our genres. So when we list the genres that we publish in and disseminate knowledge in, we added explicitly electronic kinds of genres, databases, or scholarly editions that are based on the website, all those types of things. We named them so that people would see them in the context of monograph, article, and other types of genres, so that we start to send the message, these things belong together. And then we also came up with a way to come up with sort of equivalencies, ways to say that this type of a digital object is roughly a similar kind of amount of intellectual work as this kind of traditional object. Again, so that people that are unversed in digital things would begin to be able to interpret and understand what it is we do in the digital world. Because a lot of it is ambassadorial kind of work, trying to negotiate understanding, so that when a candidate comes up for tenure review, your colleagues are sympathetic and understanding. And then we also came up with a way to do a kind of ad hoc peer reviewing, or an ad hoc kind of process for assessing. In cases where somebody didn't have the benefit of something like ARC, where they could take their object and get it peer reviewed by peers. We tried to come up with ad hoc post-publication ways of assessment, so that we would, generally speaking, how it would work is the chair would get a request from a person who produced a digital object, a digital piece of publication or work, and would get a request to have it reviewed, and then they would come up with ways that would make sense, whether the chair would independently solicit a couple of people to write letters of assessment of that object in the same way that you would get a tenure file assigned to peers for review, that type of thing. So I think that's an important step for every individual scholar to make sure that their department is articulating where digital work fits and embedding those in official documents, so that when cases go forward to other committees at other university levels, there's a clearly articulated standard and document against which these things can be measured, and therefore you have kind of a basis for making cases.
I agree with that, just to jump in, but there's two problems that we ran into with that. One is that it sort of begs the question, because you want to be able to clearly articulate standards, but it's almost impossible to clearly articulate standards that actually, because the scene is changing. I mean, you can give guidelines, but the people wanted more and more clarity. We're like, you can't give that much clarity because the scene is so fluid and changing. I mean, and equivalency is the same problem. Everyone wanted to know what counts as a book. It's the monograph is the gold standard for tenure, so which digital projects are equivalent to a book? And I said, we've got to get out of that. Because Juxta, look at this thing we built. Okay, is that a book? It's not. Forget it. I mean, it's a collaborative project. A whole bunch of people are. And insofar as we try to make our digital projects equivalent to the old genres, we hamstring innovation in a sense. Now, I get it, and I understand why you might want to, particularly as you said, Brent, explain what intellectual work went into this, and is it equivalent to the intellectual work that went into a book. But that's finely nuanced. What committees want to do is count things, and they want to say how many blog postings equals an article, how many digital editions equals a book. And there's a way that we need to make those gestures, but there's a kind of paralyzing influence if you just try to be extra clear and make everything equivalent, because all this innovation is the genre busting problem. We have all these genres we know what to do with: infrastructure building, tool building, edition building, blogging, all these things that are happening, and they're often very collaborative, right? So it's not just one person doing it in the old model of scholarship. You have these big teams of people. In fact, I would say digital humanities work, insofar as it's not collaborative, is no good anymore. And yet, for our tenure cases, we're tenuring the person, not the project. We want to see that individual mind have a sense of promise or trajectory and all that. So basically, it just means you have to do a whole lot more work to evaluate these people. And so you can have the standards and the clear articulation, but what you really need is a lot of investment on the part of the review committee and on the part of the scholar and the chair to basically talk about each case, because each case is going to be different, and really make clear what their intellectual trajectory is, how much sort of intelligence and intellectual effort and whatever interpretive sophistication was required to make this project, how much it was more on the administrative side of things. It's going to be different in almost every case.
Yeah, I have a reason to care deeply about this issue, which is I'm pre-tenure and I do digital work. And so I answered a job out here at NC State that wanted a medievalist who could do digital humanities work. And I think the department here's handled very well. One thing they've done is made things better for me is to give an annual evaluation, right? To say every year, well, this is what the voting faculty thinks about the progress. But nonetheless, the issue you raised, I think, is really important. I feel like that, to the extent, of course, I do print publications, write articles, that sort of thing. If I have a monograph or an article, it's pretty clear because you can count it. But you're essentially in this position of needing to be your own advocate, you need to articulate in a space and an opportunity to articulate what you've done. Because if you look at something like MESA, we just showed, well, what does it mean to a committee that I co-direct MESA, right? So I'm going to have to say, Laura and Andy, could you please write a letter saying what this means? Because, again, well, software is done by someone else, and I was involved in modifying it, I was involved in bringing people together. That's not easy to count, right? And it's exactly the sort of problem you're talking about. How does that fit into an evaluation of my trajectory?
Well, even more complicated, I think, is, well, there's two issues that I see, which is in relation to both of these issues, which is, one is that we're facing, and I think this was Jerry's original idea with Lens, we're facing a serious brain drain if we lose tenure, people don't get tenure who are really good digital humanists. I mean, they can obviously make more money elsewhere. They're helping us, and so I think the Academy needs to realize that. What I've done actually for one very wild case is gone to the Harvard Business Review, found the article that said how much in demand this kind of person is in the private sector, and just quoted from it and said, look, you don't tenure this time. I'm sorry, we don't think this is research, but this is what he costs you in the real world,
And we'd love to be able to have those people in the
exactly.
department. And insofar as we can't keep them, we're going to be isolating ourselves more and more from modern media, modern information, the way all the decisions that are being made by much larger players than ourselves. To what extent can the scholars really drive the shape of digital culture and their piece of that island? If there aren't anyone in the departments at the faculty level who are able to make those decisions, contribute, those decisions can be made elsewhere. They may be at the provost level, or the IT level, or Google level, or and we'll just be left with what they decided for.
And so somebody with humanities sensibilities, but also to get at what Tim was saying. I mean, you're obviously a digital humanist and you're doing all this work, but another area that we always come to this in our 9th meetings. I'm coming to Dana, so we always come to this. We bump up against technological problems that turn out to be social problems. They're not. You can build the tool, but nobody's going to use it. Or it's just not going to work. And so for us as well, a real part of digital humanities is this kind of social engineering. And I think with MESA and those kinds of things, I mean, the fact that you could have somebody here that could do that is amazing. And how do you express that? It looks like outreach or service too often to departments, when in fact it takes a great deal of intellectual work to be able to bring communities together and do the things you need to do and sort of advance the agenda of widening what we do as scholars.
Yeah, I would think if departments want to really be in the space of if they want to make a room in themselves for the digital humanities, or want to be in the larger conversation about the digital humanities, they have to be prepared to give up some of the shibboleths of tenure that they've clung to in their structure of the department, and that can be scary. But I think to have a meaningful, welcoming environment for digital humanists, the monograph has got to get, that requirement's got to get more flexible, and not just at departments where a book is sort of optional for tenure anyway, but at places where normally a book is de rigueur. There's no question you're not getting tenure without a book. But if you want to be serious in the DH space, you better rethink that position. And it's going to be difficult. You get a lot of older colleagues who went through that, a lot of blood on the floor for people who didn't get tenure, who were very bright but couldn't get the book out. And now you got this new guy coming in, he's making a database, and you're going to give it. So it's it's a people problem. It really is. A lot of it is about memory and institutional history, and how do we really want to let the digital transform the discipline? Because that's what we're talking about. Insofar as we can accommodate the digital and just say, it's like a book, let's work in formats that are very familiar, that's one kind of move. But the more radical one is to say, what will the digital do to, say, English studies, to English departments? What kinds of activities will occur within the English departments, within colleges of arts and sciences, that haven't occurred there before? If they've occurred at a kind of skunkworks level, sort of behind the scenes or over here in the corner. What if we brought those in the center of not just the research programs of the faculty, but in the classroom experience and the training of the graduate students, that stuff all became part of what English departments do? It's a radical proposition for a lot of people because it's new.